Okay, so the thumbnail is not actually clickbait. I am gonna sell this bike. But before I tell you why, I think after 2 years of riding it, exactly, I think it's worth doing a long-term review. Basically, getting this bike was like a dream come true. I've been dreaming for owning a bike like this for I don't know how long. Like I read my 140mm trail bike for a long time beforehand, and you know, the dream was getting that long travel bike, hitting the big stuff, basically, you know, kind of let loose for a while. And I tell you, like 2 years went by, I didn't even feel it. Like this bike literally is a dream come true. But as with everything, it's not all good, which is why I'm actually selling this. So I'm gonna tell you why in a bit. But basically what I want to show you today is what I like about this bike, but also what are my pet peeves with it. So let's start from the beginning. I am gonna do this one in English, by the way, because there are a lot of people out there looking to buy a Propain Spindrift. And I think a first-hand review, especially a long-term one, is gonna go a long way. It will help people see whether this bike is really for them, basically help them make the best decision possible. So why did I get this particular bike in the first place? Well, I was riding a 140mm bike for I don't know how long, 5 years maybe before that. So at a certain point I was like, okay, I'm ready to take something bigger. And this was right in the middle of the COVID pandemic, by the way, where the market was extremely short. There were no bikes available, so it was kind of hard to get your hands on something. So my ideal bike actually was the Norco Sight, which is 160-150 millimeters of travel. And the thing is, in Europe, it's really hard to get your hands on one of those. So, you know, we need to look somewhere else. So the alternatives were either the, well, YT Capra, which was a bit longer travel, or the Propain Tai. Now, the Tai looked like it was the ideal bike for me, and I still think it probably would have been a wiser decision at the time. But, you know, eager as I was, you know, lead times were horrible. Propain basically promised to ship this bike in 4 months, as opposed to the Tai, which was like 8-9 months, something like that. So I was like, okay, the Tai is 160mm, this is 180. It's not that big of a difference. Let's try it, let's get the big rig. So this is what I did. Basically, I jumped the gun. I was way too eager for a new bike, and I got the Spindrift. Now, do I regret that decision? Absolutely not. Like, this bike is by far one of the best that I have ever ridden. And it still holds true. Like, I'm gonna tell you why I'm selling this in a bit, but I really like it. It's a great all-rounder. It literally is a downhill bike that you can't pedal up. If you're really into downhill, you can actually get this bike with a 190mm fork, or even put a double crown on it. So it really is an all-rounder. You literally can do anything with that. And while that is great, it's definitely not the ideal bike for me. Like, I don't need that much travel, not by a long shot. So this is why I got the Eugene a while back, and I've actually mostly been riding that throughout the summer. The idea was to basically do an experiment, see if a shorter travel bike is gonna fit the bill, and I'm happy to say that it actually does. It climbs better, it's a bit rougher on the downhill, but for the trails that I'm riding, it's actually ideal. This one is definitely an overkill for what we have here. I still remember my first ride with this bike like it was yesterday. First impression, this thing, this Dreadnought, it climbs exceptionally well. Like I told you, I used to ride 140mm trail bike. On my first ride, on my favorite trail, I beat all of my Strava records on the climb. First try. I haven't even gotten used to it. It's that good. And it has a coil shock. And I didn't even lock it. It just blew my mind. My second impression of this bike was how good it descends. Now this isn't a surprise. Again, it's from my 140mm trail bike to this basically downhill machine. Like, it's obvious it's gonna be much better. But it was much better from the get-go. Like, I haven't even dialed in my suspension yet. Like, the coil shock was, I mean, that's pretty much working out of the box, but the fork, especially the original one, because I changed it, was still, no, it was kind of fiddly to work with. I haven't ridden RockShox before. I used to run Manitou on my trail bike, so I haven't gotten used to the damper system yet. Even so, that thing was a magic carpet from the get-go. It's unique. Like, if you're looking for a bike that will basically eat up every single bump, I mean, conservatively, of course, don't expect miracles, this is an amazing solution. It's just... The third thing that this thing surprised me with is how nimble it is. It's a 29er, it's pretty heavy. That's actually one of the drawbacks, but we'll talk about that later. For its weight, you don't really feel that on the way down. I don't even know how to describe it. It could be the size, it could be just the reach, but it's amazing. Like, you can do a whole lot of stuff with this bike that you wouldn't think you'll be able to, because it feels like a big rig. Like, it has 180 front and back, but even so, you can actually throw it around, and it's pretty compliant to what you're trying to do. And at the same time, and I know this sounds contradictory, but it's also quite stiff. Like, you feel that it doesn't flex a lot. It's an extremely precise machine that can basically deliver the performance that you would look for in a downhill bike in a much smaller package that you basically can pedal up the hill. Okay, let's talk a bit about the drawbacks as well. Now, that weight that I just mentioned, yeah, you still can throw it around a lot. But while it's an exceptional climber, it's not an all-day bike. Like, at least for me, like, I'm not fit, granted, but like, this isn't a bike that I would want to pedal all day. The weight that it has will get to you eventually. It's easy to climb, it doesn't bob much. Like, the suspension linkage is actually quite impressive. But even so, like, if you climb and then do 2-3 laps, like, usually the laps here are around 13 kilometers in total, so you have around 6-7 climbing, it gets to you. Like, at a certain point, it just gets to you. It's definitely not an all-day bike. You need to take some rests. You need to let yourself breathe if you're gonna use this for the whole day. Can you? Absolutely. Is it the most optimal bike for the task? I wouldn't say so. And I'm saying that especially since I got the Eugene, because It's still Propain, it's still the same linkage. It feels very much like this bike, just, you know, with a bit less travel. But it's much lighter than this, and it's a bike that you definitely can't pedal all day. Granted that it's meant for that. Like, I don't have any illusions there, but just something to keep in mind. Like, it can take the hits on the downhill. You can ride this thing in the bike park all day long, but if you're going to be climbing it, you know, have a peace of mind, because it gets exhausting after a while. Second problem I have with this bike is maintainability. Like, there are several things that I constantly find myself doing that are quite challenging. The first one is brake bleeding. Like, this being a downhill oriented machine, like, you get through a lot of pads, and with that you have to bleed the brakes a lot. Now, this thing has Magura MT7s, like the basic model. It's I can't get those brakes to not rub. Like, it's impossible. I don't know how to do it. If anyone has any ideas, please let me know. But it just doesn't work. And as if to prove my complaints about the brakes, I currently don't have a back brake. Like, I routed the cables internally specifically for this video, and now I don't have a back brake. So the downhill will be interesting. Second thing, rear hub is extremely loud. Like, I need to grease that thing at least once every 2 months if I'm riding this bike primarily. And it's a hassle. Like, I need to get an 11mm Allen wrench key for the hub, otherwise you can't open it. I don't know who does that, but I needed to do that. And the last thing is, I don't know if that's a service thing, but the bottom bracket starts to creak quite soon after servicing. So I pretty much need to tighten it once a month if I'm riding this a lot. I don't know why I tried all possible anti-seize agents. It doesn't work. I can't get it to stick. It just unwinds. You have to tighten it. Yeah, last thing, if you need to get the shock out, boy is it hard. Like, that linkage is perfect in terms of performance, but if you need to get that shock out, you better have some patience. And when you need to put it back in, you better have even more patience, because it's even worse than getting it out of there. Last thing that I think is a drawback is how loud this bike is. And again, there are a couple of reasons for that. First one is the drivetrain isn't ideal. Like, the SRAM GX is pretty loud. The clutch isn't the best, so the chain rattles a lot. There are solutions for that. Like, you have those, I don't know what you call them, the eyelets for the chain that basically quiets it down a lot. But the chain rattles. It's not quiet. The second thing that rattles a lot is the cables. Now, I don't know what they did with the cable routing. I know that they fixed it in the later years, but this thing rattles a lot. Like, for the majority of my time owning this bike, I actually routed the shifter cable and the rear brake cable on the outside of the frame, so I avoid that. And I even thought about getting a wireless dropper post so I can quiet down the dropper cable as well. Like, it's pretty bad. I specifically routed the cables internally for this video, so you can hear that, and we'll see that in a bit. But this is definitely something that's a problem, and I even reached out to Propain to get an idea of how I can quiet it down. It's impossible. Like, I tried everything. It's one of the things I need to live with this bike. So, all said and done, like, this bike is still fucking phenomenal. Like, I really enjoy riding it. Like, a couple of weeks back, I haven't taken it out for a while. I experimented with the new trails on a nearby mountain that are, you know, a bit rougher than what I'm used to. So I was like, well, okay, let's take the big hitter out. And suddenly I remembered why this bike is so amazing on the downhill. Like, suddenly I stopped losing my pedals. You know, all the rock gardens started being quite smooth. It was an interesting experience after the Eugene. So why am I still selling it? Well, realistically speaking, I don't need this big of a bike. Like I just, you know, kind of started thinking about the type of riding I was doing recently, and like for the whole summer I didn't go to a single bike park. I didn't go to one of our gnarly trails. It was a lot of flowy trails, blue grades, here and there red, but it's like I didn't really need a bike like this. So at a certain point I realized that it's not worth trying to get this up the mountain, especially on the longer rides when I have the Eugene. And the Eugene climbs marginally better than this one for the minor cost of, you know, a bit less performance on the downhill. Like I have to pick my lines a bit better. I have to be a bit more mindful of, you know, what kind of hits I take. But even so, you can argue that that makes the riding even more fun. So, you know, at a certain point, I just decided that it's not worth maintaining two bikes, especially of this caliber. So one of them has to go. And for the type of riding, I think I'm gonna stick with the Eugene. I like the suspension there. Fox really surprised me. And yeah, with that, unfortunately, this one will have to go. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this review. It's probably not the most optimal out there, but it's basically the several giveaways that I can give you after owning this bike for 2 years. Like these are the things that stuck with me the most. Of course there are other stuff, but those are the things that I think are most important about owning a Propain Spindrift. If you enjoyed this video, thumbs up. If you didn't, well, the thumbs down button is still there. And if you want to see more of me, then you can subscribe. See ya. Cool thing. The cable rattle was fixed somehow.